Welcome to the Daily Globe. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon for more breaking updates. In a landmark decision that will be studied for years to come, the Supreme Court has struck down President Trump's sweeping tariffs, a move that few predicted would come so swiftly or decisively. The announcement sent immediate shockwaves through global markets, with investors scrambling to assess the implications and economists racing to update their forecasts. The ruling has redefined the balance of power in American trade policy, upending years of precedent and sparking intense debate across the financial world. At its core, the decision reasserts congressional authority over trade, directly challenging the executive branch's expansive use of emergency powers. It raises fundamental questions about what truly constitutes a national emergency in economic policy, and whether the president should have unilateral power to reshape the global trading system. By invalidating tariffs on nearly all imports, the court has set a powerful new precedent, one that will shape the relationship between Congress and the presidency for generations to come, and may even influence how future administrations approach international negotiations. President Trump condemned the decision in the strongest terms, calling it a grave threat to national security and warning of dire consequences for American workers and industries. Meanwhile, business leaders and international partners welcomed the ruling as a long-awaited step toward stability and predictability in global commerce, hoping it will ease tensions and restore confidence in cross-border trade. Around the world, people watched as the court's verdict promised to reshape not only the rules of global commerce, but also America's role as a leader in the international economic order. Now, the question on everyone's mind is what comes next for the American economy? How will this decision ripple through supply chains, affect jobs, and impact the delicate balance of international trade? This story is about far more than tariffs. It's about the nature of power, the weight of precedent, and the enduring principles that govern a nation in a rapidly changing world. President Trump's second term began with a bold move, invoking the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEPA, to impose sweeping tariffs, first targeting fentanyl trafficking, then expanding to address the U.S. trade deficit. The administration bypassed Congress, using national emergency declarations to levy a blanket 10% tariff on nearly all imports, plus higher country-specific duties. The legal justification relied on a broad reading of the IEPA, a 1977 law historically used for targeted sanctions, not for nationwide economic policy. Critics argued this was an unprecedented stretch of executive power, usurping Congress's constitutional authority to levy taxes and tariffs. A coalition of business groups, legal scholars, and lawmakers challenged the administration, claiming the president had overreached. The stage was set for a constitutional showdown over the separation of powers. The dispute quickly moved from political debate to the nation's courtrooms. The administration's aggressive tariff strategy quickly triggered a wave of lawsuits from businesses across the country, many of whom argued that the new tariffs threatened their livelihoods and disrupted established trade relationships. Companies large and small, from manufacturers to importers, found themselves caught in the crossfire of a rapidly escalating legal and economic battle. These lawsuits were soon consolidated into a handful of landmark cases, each one challenging the president's authority to impose tariffs under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA. The legal community watched closely, recognizing that the outcome could redefine the balance of power between Congress and the executive branch. Plaintiffs argued that issues like trade deficits and drug trafficking, while serious, did not rise to the level of extraordinary threats that the IEEPA was originally intended to address. They contended that the law was being stretched far beyond its original purpose, setting a dangerous precedent for future administrations. Central to their argument was the belief that only Congress, not the president, possessed the constitutional authority to impose such sweeping tariffs on foreign goods. Lawmakers themselves weighed in, warning of executive overreach and the erosion of legislative power. In a series of closely watched decisions, federal courts largely sided with the challengers. Judges ruled that the president had overstepped constitutional boundaries, emphasizing the importance of maintaining the separation of powers at the heart of American democracy. The Federal Circuit affirmed these rulings, making it clear that the power to levy tariffs rests with Congress, not the executive. This decision sent shockwaves through Washington, raising questions about the limits of presidential authority in economic matters. However, a minority of judges dissented, arguing for broad presidential authority in times of perceived crisis. Their opinions fueled the administration's determination to appeal the case all the way to the Supreme Court, hoping for a reversal. The legal climate had shifted in recent years, with a landmark Supreme Court decision signaling growing skepticism toward unchecked executive power. Legal scholars and the public alike debated what this might mean for the future of presidential authority. As the case reached the Supreme Court, the stakes could not have been higher. At issue was not just a single trade policy, but the fundamental limits of presidential power in an increasingly interconnected and globalized economy. The outcome would set a powerful precedent, shaping the future of American trade policy and the constitutional balance of power for generations to come. In a decisive 6-3 ruling, the Supreme Court struck down the tariffs, affirming that the IEEPA does not grant the president unlimited power to reshape economic policy. Chief Justice Roberts wrote that Congress alone holds the authority to impose broad-based tariffs, and any delegation of such power must be explicit. The court distinguished between targeted sanctions and sweeping duties that function as a national tax. President Trump denounced the decision, vowing to seek other legal avenues to protect American industries. Congressional leaders and business groups hailed the ruling as a victory for the rule of law and economic stability. The verdict rebalanced power between the branches of government and set the stage for a new debate over U.S. trade policy. The decision's impact was immediate, reshaping the political and economic landscape. The Supreme Court's decision unleashed a fiscal shock. The government may owe importers up to $1 trillion in tariff refunds. The Treasury faces the daunting task of processing claims and determining eligibility, creating one of the largest potential payouts in U.S. history. The ruling erased projected tariff revenues, forcing a major rethink of federal budget and tax policy. Businesses must now navigate a complex transition, deciding whether to revert supply chains and how to use potential refunds. While the decision promises long-term stability, the short-term adjustment will be turbulent for many industries. The process of issuing refunds will be slow, and the threat of new trade barriers still looms. The trillion-dollar question is just the beginning of the economic challenges ahead. For American businesses, the ruling brings relief and new challenges. The removal of tariffs eases cost burdens and offers the prospect of massive refunds. But companies face costly supply chain adjustments and uncertainty over the refund process. Many firms are investing in flexibility, preparing for a volatile transition as they recalibrate pricing and inventory. For consumers, price drops will be slow to materialize as businesses wait for clarity and replenish inventories. The main benefit for households is reduced economic uncertainty, which can foster job growth and wage stability. Companies receiving refunds may invest, hire, or avoid layoffs, but direct savings for consumers will take time. The decision stabilizes the economic outlook, but the path to lower prices is gradual. In the long run, a predictable trade environment benefits everyone. The Supreme Court's ruling was met with relief by America's trading partners, who had watched months of uncertainty with growing concern. In capitals from Brussels to Tokyo, officials welcomed the decision as a sign that the U.S. would once again honor its commitments to international agreements and establish trade norms. The verdict signaled a return to a more predictable, rules-based trade order. Global markets rallied, with investors interpreting the decision as a green light for cross-border commerce and investment. Stock exchanges from New York to Hong Kong saw immediate gains, reflecting renewed confidence in the stability of the global trading system. Yet, the optimism is cautious. Underlying trade tensions remain unresolved, and many analysts warn that the path ahead is still fraught with challenges. The ruling may have eased immediate fears, but it has not erased the deep-seated mistrust that lingers between major economies. The administration, determined to protect domestic industries, may seek new ways to impose duties or introduce alternative trade barriers, keeping businesses and governments on alert for further policy shifts. The decision is especially significant for China, which gains some breathing room to recalibrate its own economic strategy and strengthen ties with other trading partners. However, China still faces a web of existing U.S. tariffs and ongoing scrutiny, making its path forward complex and uncertain. The ruling forces a recalibration of global economic strategy, prompting companies and governments alike to rethink supply chains, investment plans, and diplomatic priorities. It's a powerful reminder that even the U.S., with all its economic might, is ultimately bound by legal and constitutional limits, an anchor in turbulent times. Allies hope for renewed cooperation through multilateral institutions like the WTO, seeing the ruling as a chance to rebuild trust and strengthen the global rules-based system. The verdict shapes the toolkit of U.S. economic power, setting new boundaries for what Washington can and cannot do in the name of national interest. It also encourages faith in international dispute resolution, reminding nations that legal recourse remains a viable path in times of conflict. For a world accustomed to unpredictability from Washington, the court's decision is a signal that the pendulum may be swinging back towards stability, even if the future remains uncertain. The court's decision offers a new, if still untested, compass for navigating the shifting landscape of global trade and diplomacy. The future of global trade will be shaped not just by this legal turning point, but by how nations choose to respond, whether with renewed cooperation or with fresh competition and rivalry. Legal experts hail the Supreme Court's ruling as a landmark for the separation of powers, reinforcing that major economic decisions must originate in Congress. The verdict curtails executive overreach and clarifies the legal foundation for U.S. economic statecraft, making future sanctions and trade tools more credible. For businesses and consumers, the immediate impact is reduced volatility and greater confidence in planning. Companies may invest and hire with more certainty, though consumers won't see direct refunds. Policy analysts note that while the IEEPA is now limited, other statutes like Section 122 and Section 301 remain available, though they are more cumbersome. The ruling makes it harder for any president to impose sweeping tariffs unilaterally. The decision's true legacy is a stronger check on executive power and a more stable economic environment. The debate now shifts to how future administrations will use the remaining tools at their disposal. The Supreme Court's decision is a defining moment for American governance and the global economy. It reaffirms that executive power has limits, especially in matters of trade and taxation, and that Congress must lead on fundamental economic policy. The ruling highlights the complexity of modern supply chains and the importance of stable, predictable trade relationships. The challenge ahead is to craft a trade policy that protects American interests while strengthening the global system. The court has spoken, but the debate over America's economic future continues. These questions require active engagement from citizens and lawmakers alike. The direction of U.S. trade policy will be shaped by public dialogue and democratic participation. At this historic crossroads, the nation's path forward depends on all of us.